Hello, listeners, and welcome to this third and final part in the mini-series on When Therapists Become Abusive. Here is Emma Stevens. How did you decide to sit down and write this book? Was this a continuation of your you feel like a calling to perhaps highlight the exploitative nature of therapists and counselors, how you felt when you decided to go ahead with these legal proceedings? Or is it something you've always done, or did you just fall into it? I'm always really interested in how people manage to sit down and write not one, but two full manuscripts.
Well, there is a little background in my life of writing. When I was in my childhood home, my parents would, there wasn't really any talking with my parents. They would just be authoritarian and tell us what to think. So I would go to my room and get a piece of paper and a pen and try to express myself with words, trying to think about what I was feeling. And usually they turned out to be apology letters to them because I was a people pleaser and I wanted everything to be okay. But at the same time, I was learning a skill of how to write. And then fast forward to, I got an undergrad in journalism. So I was writing a lot and had always been told that, hey, you're a pretty good writer. So it wasn't really a big stretch to think that I might sit down and actually write a book, but it wasn't. I'd written a lot of things that just sounded like a diary, like all those journals that I had written. But then something happened in the pandemic and I started doing EMDR. That's really what started the whole thing, because I was asked by my certified counselor of EMDR to imagine a safe place. And so I had this visual of a tree and grassy mountains and wildflowers. That's the cover of my first book, The Gathering Place. In fact, that was my special place, the gathering place. And throughout that book, I talk about how I, weave my inner parts or my younger selves, and I have conversations with them. And it was all because of EMDR that I was able to think of that concept. And then I thought, I have all my facts of my life that read like a diary, but what if I weave them around an EMDR type situation? And I think it really worked. People have said that it really was able to, they see their own lives throughout what I'm saying my story is. And so then I do include a little bit of the or what happened to me with a psychologist in the first book. So about 8 months after I wrote the first book, I thought, you know what? I'm not done. I have more to say about that specific experience. And then again, I was just possessed where I could not type fast enough to get it out of me. And then I thought about the fire being just like EMDR was the way I weaved my story. The fire was how I weaved this story.
Well, I mean, if people want all of the details, the best thing to do is go and pick up the book, which I highly recommend listeners go and do. There's a moment where the fire has almost damaged everything apart from where you're living. There's just so many moments in the book that kind of have this strange symbolic nature almost. So I see exactly why you used that as a theme to stitch everything together. And it's just such an educational and wonderfully written book. And I really hope that other people will consider grabbing a copy. It's a conversation in the anti-cult space that I think there needs to be more awareness of, more studies done. Do you use your masters in a professional capacity as well as with your writing?
Well, I do use the tools that I learned. And I was a physical trainer, personal trainer for about 18 years and a group exercise. And so I found that I could use my psychology with my clients because often they'd come in and they'd say, I just don't feel like working out today. And so I realized I had to get through that angst, whatever they were. So I'd talk with them and I had good interpersonal relationships with them. And then I could say, okay, now we're going to do some squats. Now we're going to do some push-ups. So I was able to use all of that. And now I look back and see that I was in advertising before that, and I used psychology. And then it was a personal trainer, used psychology there. Then having children, you use psychology, right? And then I get to use it with writing my books. And so I think it's just a part of me, but no, I don't have a certificate. I didn't do the hours, and I'm not a professional counselor in any shape or form.
Professional writer, to say the least, is definitely something that's up there. And it's really fascinating that you talk about using psychology in so many different capacities, but never in a way that is used to exploit or harm others. And I think that that's the key thing to explore in this last part of our talk. How can a person find a safe therapist, a safe counselor? How can people arm themselves, protect themselves when it's likely that they are already in a heightened state of vulnerability and really need some support and some help?
Yes, that's a very good question. And to answer that, even if I had Googled, well, I don't know that Google was even available, but even if I had researched the court records about my psychologist, nothing would have shown up because no one had come forth. They were all too psychologically damaged to even write out their testimony. And we even tried to get them part of our court proceeding, but they were not willing. And I understand completely because it was really difficult. But nowadays that we have all the technology that we have, you can do health grade and you can check and see if there have been any complaints or what they say about your doctor. And also know that you can say, I'm considering hiring you. Could I have a 15-minute consultation? And you can see and ask them pointed questions. And if you get a sense that they're defensive or that, there's just some kind of red flag in your system that they're not being authentic or transparent, then I'd say keep going and find someone else. If you feel like that they're talking too much about themselves, that's a red flag. If they keep you over your allotted time, and they say, oh, my other client canceled, you can stay for another hour, that's a red flag. If they invite you off campus out of the therapy session to go to their home, a movie, dinner, a walk, whatever, that's a red flag. That's blurring the boundaries. And so I think that's part of why I'm an advocate, is to let people know that if awareness is key on every issue, the more we know about this, the more we can steer clear, because these type sociopathic people are in every profession. They're in our schools, there are policemen, anyone can be of that nature. So we have to be careful and do our homework as an individual to make sure we're staying safe.
Tricky to consider abusive therapists because they are specifically trained and certified in being ethical and not abusing their power, their knowledge, their status, their position. So when this happens, it's almost like it's almost like a double whammy. It's almost worse that it's happening in these environments, because this is exactly where it should never happen. And it's a tricky thing to try and unpick.
I agree, because you already buy off on the fact that they have a credential, they're a doctor, they've been to school for 8 years, whatever. You automatically give them that respect and honor that they know what they're doing. So that's, I think, why it makes it so insidious, and you don't question because they have those credentials and there's that power differential. So we have to realize that we have rights. We have consumer rights to find out where we're going to be safe. And just because someone has a lot of certifications on the wall does not mean that they're qualified.
People talk about HIPAA violations a lot. And so HIPAA is an acronym for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. And I think that what's important about that particular acronym is that you can go and research exactly what it means, and when there's been a HIPAA violation or breach, and maybe that's one step towards understanding your rights as a client by reading up what is expected of a therapist, a counselor, and a doctor, and what a client can expect in those environments. So maybe I'll pop a link to that website in the episode description for anybody that's wondering, well, what are the boundaries? What are the legal boundaries? What are the ethical boundaries? And place some resources in there for anybody who might be wondering themselves what those things are exactly. But it's difficult because the nuanced approaches that are used by individuals that know how to coercively control an individual will probably also be aware in how to carefully skirt around certain things, and that's one of the really difficult things to navigate in these types of environments. So just before we finish up today, I wondered if you could tell the listeners who are maybe thinking about writing their own memoir, if you have any advice or little bits of wisdom that you can offer, and also where everybody can find a copy of either one of your books, but specifically A Fire is Coming, for the purpose of today's conversation.
Sure, I would love to do that. And they both books are on Audible, which I really enjoyed reading and narrating both of those. The Gathering Place, an adoptee story, and the second one is A Fire is Coming. You can find those both on Amazon, and you can also, like I said, they're both on Audible. And I think even to back it up, before you even think about writing a book, is the idea of writing to heal. And that takes me back to the first part of my story when I said that I was a little girl in my room trying to, take those pre-verbal emotions and put them into language. And that just built upon itself where I didn't even know that I was doing somatic healing by journaling, just writing anything pen to paper. And that just progressed as I got older, being more and more of a skill. And writing to heal is a very real thing. Whether you get published, whether you write a book or not, but just writing down your thoughts, your emotions, or let's say you've just had a terrible argument with your boss and just trying to find out, why am I so angry with them? When you write your feelings down, it may be on page 6. You may have to go through a lot of garbage to get to the kernel of what, oh yeah, there's the essence of what I'm trying to say. But that's what writing's all about, is that it doesn't come out maybe in your first word. It might be on page 6, but it's still, all of that writing was important to get to page 6. And for writing, anyone, telling your story is so important. I hear a lot of people say, but it's been told before. My story doesn't have any fantastical things like maybe what I had. But no one can tell your story the way you can tell your story. And whether you publish or put it in a drawer or you make it for a legacy for your children or your family, it's just so important for you to give yourself that honor and that respect and self-worth, that you matter, regardless of what happened to you, because we all have trauma. But just something about writing it out on paper makes it real. And I think we owe it to ourselves to do that.
Big thing I often have conversations with people about as well, through emails and communications, when people get in touch to express their interest in sharing their stories. And sometimes people will say, but I'm worried that my story is not interesting enough, or I'm worried that my story isn't severe enough. And the big emphasis is always on every single person's story is important. Everybody should be able to share in whatever capacity they feel comfortable with their experiences and their knowledge and their story. And there will always be something in everybody's world that can help to inform and educate another person, no matter anybody's personal reservations. And I would always encourage people to do that if it's something they feel they want to do but they're being held back. But the one thing I really wanted to end on, and to ask your insight into, and I suppose it might be one of the most important things we talk about, is if there are exploitative and abusive therapists, counselors, doctors, and professionals, but therapy can really positively change a person's life and save people's lives. There's a really difficult thing to balance there. And you've mentioned yourself that you 6 years ago entered into a type of therapy that's really helped you change your perspective and change your life. So we don't want to deter people from getting the support they need. We want to make sure that we're not turning people away from the potential of accessing therapy and counselors. What do we look for on the flip side? And where can we go to find the right type of support? Specifically, like cult informed, trauma informed for listeners of this podcast, because again, that seems to be something that's lacking in the general public.
Well, it was very hard for me when I went to that first counselor after the exploitation, because so few counselors, therapists do know how to deprogram someone that's been in a coercive control situation like that. And like I said, it took me, I'm sure she did somewhat help me, but it took me many years after that really to resolve it. But I am a huge proponent to go to counseling. I have two right now, and I'm ecstatic to tell anyone that wants to hear, because one, I go for cognitive therapy, and the other one is still my EMDR therapist, and we also do cognitive. But the perfect balance that we have is just instrumental and really has helped me so much. And the way you know that they're really good is they never tell you what to think. They never steal your epiphanies away from you by telling you what your epiphany is. They just allow you to, they're just really there as a guide, and not to be put on a pedestal of they're a guru or they know everything. Sometimes their lives are just as messed up as other people, but they are able to separate and see your situation. And yes, you do need to be vulnerable, because that's the only way that you're going to have breakthroughs. That's true. But just make sure you're doing a breakthrough with the right person. I think nowadays it's a lot easier to make sure you're in the safe place, because we have adoptee competent therapists that are adoptees themselves that are now becoming therapists. So, but even with that, you have to be careful. You have to make sure that what you think is competent is what they think is competent. And so I think just in any situation in our lives, we need to make sure that the communication is there. And my definition is what your definition is, and don't do any assuming of, well, they have that credential, so I'm sure they know how to do this, and I'm in a safe place. Just do your homework.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Linda. I truly appreciate it. And what an excellent memoir you've written that really encapsulates the tricky, nuanced difficulties in unweaving what is true to yourself and what is being taught to you by somebody that knows how to teach you those things and make you believe that you are responsible for those teachings and that they are your beliefs, and that these are the things that you deserve, or these are the things you've brought onto yourself, all for that person's own agenda. It's an excellent book, and I haven't read anything else that really highlights understanding how therapists and counselors can be using their positions of power and their knowledge to really traumatize or re-traumatize people for their own personal benefit and gain. It's such an important piece. It's extremely timely and prevalent right now because of this online space that we're being thrust into, with all of these individuals that say that they are professionals of Reiki, and they have somebody in my local village was telling me she was a a licensed Reiki, trainer, and she had credentials for it. But then when I looked it up, there isn't like a board of people that acknowledge when an individual can be a professional Reiki instructor, as far as I could find. So it's just an incredible piece that is so important. There are a lot of online figures right now who are calling themselves gurus, who are calling themselves enlightened beings, who are really speaking to a demographic of vulnerable individuals that are most likely isolated and struggling with a lot of the same things that individuals that access therapy would be struggling with. So I truly appreciate your writing and your work. I don't know if you're planning on writing another book, but I would love to read it if you do.
Well, there's got to be a trilogy. There has to be a third one to, fill it out. So I haven't written it yet, but because I'm still living it right now, but I think there will be a third.
Excellent. That's fantastic news. And I'll put all the links in the episode description for listeners to find their own copy of A Fire is Coming by Linda Campbell Pivac, also known as Emma Stevens, the pseudonym, the author of A Fire is Coming. So thank you so much for your time today. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey. I really appreciate you.
Take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye.
That is the end of this mini-series on when therapists become abusive. To get in touch with Emma Stevens or find a copy of her memoir A Fire is Coming, you can follow the links in the episode description. And to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.